Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about the number of books that is sold by Dungeons & Dragons, and specifically how this is it's virtually irrelevant to the value of Dungeons & Dragons. It is not a strong indicator of the value of Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, so the reason why I'm talking about this today is I was listening to a video of a gentleman talking specifically about Mike Mearls. This gentleman was not happy with one of Mike Mearls' recent decisions, right? And he had said that specifically that Mike Mearls' decision would prompt decision to say something specifically would prompt a reduction in sales, and that in books sold for Dungeons & Dragons. And that because of that, Mike Mearls' job would be in danger. And I just shook my head because it's the most ridiculous, naive understanding of Dungeons & Dragons. And I think there are people out there, I hear this a lot. People are like, well, I'm not going to buy the book. And like, it kind of makes me laugh because I just kind of want to make it clear, right? And just help the misunderstanding that book sales are critical to the success of Dungeons & Dragons. They are absolutely not critical to the sale of Dungeons & Dragons. And the reason why is the Dungeons & Dragons, the value of Dungeons & Dragons is intellectual property. And its value is not directly tied anymore to the sale of its books. It's way more complicated than that. And I just want to talk about that for a little bit, okay? All right, so what is the value of Dungeons & Dragons today? So Dungeons & Dragons is an intellectual property, right? And basically, the rule books are part of the success of Dungeons & Dragons. But I would actually link it to 1% of the success of Dungeons & Dragons. 1%, right? And the reason why is Dungeons & Dragons come out in 1974. It's a part of Americana. It's exactly like Coca-Cola or jazz or baseball or comic books, okay? It is a part of American history, and its name is known worldwide, right? And when you say Dungeons & Dragons, it connotates many, many things in the minds of many people, right? And that is incredibly valuable. Name recognition today is immensely valuable, and Dungeons & Dragons has absolute name recognition. It has better name recognition than every other tabletop role-playing game combined, without exception. The vast majority of Americans would be hard-pressed to name even a single role-playing game beyond Dungeons & Dragons, in my opinion, okay? All right, so if you have this game and it's not selling books, what can Dungeons & Dragons sell, right? Well, right now, Dungeons & Dragons is owned by Hasbro. They're a toy company, right? So Dungeons & Dragons doesn't actually need to sell anything, right? Not only is Dungeons & Dragons nested in a very robust, healthy company, right? It's actually nested within a company, right? Hasbro brought Wizards of the Coast, right? So Dungeons & Dragons is not only nested under Hasbro, it's nested under Wizards of the Coast. And Wizards of the Coast has a cash cow called Magic the Gathering, right? Magic the Gathering makes ridiculous amounts of money, does extremely well, and they've come out with new product literally every 4 months, right? That is widely, bought, and that thing is like a freight train of cash. It does extremely well, right? Now, so the reality is, if sales of Dungeons & Dragons dip, Wizards of the Coast is not especially books, is not in any way really threatened at all, right? They own Dungeons & Dragons, and Dungeons & Dragons sits as a shining Fabergé egg within Hasbro, within Wizards of the Coast. It doesn't need to sell a single book to be valuable. It's incredibly valuable without the sales of a single book. The books are not the engine for value within Dungeons & Dragons, okay? Because of name recognition, the actual value of Dungeons & Dragons is the following, right? There's Dungeons & Dragons apparel. I think right now you can buy every single thing you want, appareled. You can apparel yourself entirely with Dungeons & Dragons swag, except for maybe underwear and socks. And I think there's even socks. So, so you have apparel, you have video games, you have novels, right? Now, some of these lines, they waver. They come in, they go out, right? But the fact is that there's always being new property being made for Dungeons and Dragons. And then also there is this gleaming hope of the movie, right? Now, so you also have movies, right? So you have, and then also you have comic books, right? So you have apparel, you have comic books, you have video games, you have the movie, and then the last one, people don't even realize this last one, right, is it really does sit like a Fabergé egg, right? And that is not an exaggeration in any way, all right? So Dungeons & Dragons is valuable, it's a known property, right? And then even beyond that, right now, the shape of our world is that technology is winning everything, right? And so every year you get new billionaires that get spun up who, sold some kind of company or something and gets billions of dollars in technology. And many of those technologists are interested in Dungeons and Dragons. So not only is it valuable in the vast array of products that can be made from it, other than the rule books, which is probably the least powerful profit engine there is for Dungeons and Dragons, right? Also, it just being mentioned in television shows like Stranger Things, it just builds that brand, right? And that's the other thing is I hadn't even talked. There's always the possibility it could be turned into a television show, right? So the reality, which has already happened once, okay. So all these things combined, you have a profit engine on multiple streams of products, all attached to Dungeons and Dragons. The rule books are the very least important of the profit mechanisms that are attached to Dungeons and Dragons. And then there's also this possibility that at any time, if Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro gets sick of Dungeons and Dragons, there's a really strong possibility there could be a long line of buyers that would buy this thing like a national sports team, like a basketball team or a baseball team, right? There are, the number of people who would be interested in that property are exactly the type of people who would have billions of dollars to spend on that type of a purchase. So that's my point is, if you're looking closely at the sales of Dungeons and Dragons and what happens within Dungeons and Dragons, and I care deeply about the history, the present, and the future of Dungeons and Dragons, right? But if you're looking at that, it's very important to remember that the sales of the rule books are not directly tied to the success of the game. I would even say that when the rules become very, very popular, I think it does drive some of these other sales. But even when Dungeons and Dragons falls back into obscurity, right? The apparel and the video games and all those kind of things are really very well unaffected. Because the reality is, Dungeons & Dragons is known throughout the country. It has established its name, and its name continues to grow. And that growth, I'm not really sure how strongly it's tied to the rule books themselves, right? And that's even growing even more now with Dungeons & Dragons Beyond. Many, many players are playing the game and don't even own any of the books, right? Although I do think D&D Beyond is a subscription service, right? But it's very important when you're thinking about Dungeons & Dragons to remember that its success is really not tied at all to the success of the actual physical book sales. I know that seems like kind of that's kind of an unusual point to raise, but when I was watching this video, I think there's still a lot of players and dungeon masters that think their purchase of the books, will make or break, Dungeons and Dragons. That's just not the case at all. Now, I absolutely think we should all buy, all three of the core rule books, and it's critical to buy the core rule books. I really feel like everybody who cares about Dungeons and Dragons should own the three core rule books. Right? That's really important, and it does help Dungeons and Dragons to buy those. But you not buying those is not going to mean that there's that Dungeons and Dragons will just fade away, right? That's just a ridiculous assumption, and it's just ignoring the very real reality today that one of the most valuable things in today's world is name brand recognition, and Dungeons and Dragons has name brand recognition, and that while the game waxes and wanes in play, its name brand recognition has remained strong, and I think will remain strong for decades or even centuries. I'm not sure, I think even if you fell back to only a remnant of people playing the game, I don't think that people would forget exactly what Dungeons and Dragons is. And I think one of the reasons for that is the people who play it are really unusual. And when you see what it is, what Dungeons and Dragons is, tabletop role-playing games themselves are so, it's just such a powerful element. It's quite memorable. The other issue is, the other thing, and we didn't even talk about this, but I should talk about this as well, is every single new tabletop role-playing game that's ever created points back to Dungeons & Dragons. So even if the game were to wane significantly, right, you still have all these people building. There's hundreds of people building new tabletop role-playing games, maybe thousands at any given time, or well over 1,000. It's amazing how many new tabletop role-playing games are made all the time, and how many tabletop role-playing games are trying to be built and strengthened out there, right? And all of them, anybody who gets interested in them, they end up, looking back to Dungeons and Dragons. So just remember, the success of Dungeons and Dragons is not critically tied to the success, to the sales of the rule books. It's much, much more complicated than that. Take care.